Alright, Phil asked me about why test-driven development and what do I do it on, since I'm working on a single-player game and not doing it with network code the way he does it. And then the other question was about the component-based object system in my game. So I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly so that it doesn't end up being a 20-minute video. So why test-driven development? So I don't know, a couple years back, my day job sent me to Dr. Dobbs' Architecture and Design World conference, and there I saw a session by Robert Martin, also known as Uncle Bob. I'm not actually sure, I couldn't find any reason why he was called that, but whatever. And he gave a talk on test-driven development, and a big part of his talk, he kept referencing a book that he just finished, which was, this is something I probably should have done research on. But in any case, he talked about the test-driven development is what professionals do. Now, there's people who argue about it, whether or not that's, you need to test first, or if you can just test last, or whatever, but it made an impression on me. So I was really interested in that. I prepared for this to try and get through it faster. I've also read it on Noel Lopez's blog, Games From Within, and he's written about test-driven development in games, which is kind of huge because I don't know anybody else who really talks about it in terms of games. Usually they're talking about business applications and WinForms and things like that, and it's like I've never touched any code like that. All the code I've ever written has been, at my day job, where it was within a framework making slot machines, or what I'm working on, and so his insight was pretty good. And so that's why I'm interested in test-driven development. And so you asked, what do I test? Currently I test everything. Noel, in an email to me after I asked him what he does, told me that he tends to try to, lots of low-level things. That's usually what he tests and builds the code around that. But usually the game, high-level game logic, he leaves alone. I don't really have much in the way of high-level game logic that's, I don't know, I guess high-level enough that I can't do test-driven development. So I've actually, at this point in time with my current project, I have 550 passing unit tests, and there's still a lot more code that I can see needing to write before I can see releasing this game in a playable, well, it's playable now, but it's not fun for anyone. So I'm trying to add more features to it. But anyway, so I try to test as much as I can, and the way I've architected it so far, I haven't really run into a problem where like I can't test this code because it's tied too directly to something. Like SDL is even kind of wrapped up in something, so I could fake that out, and then anything that needs to interact with the hardware is usually interacting with some interface. And so testing is actually fairly simple there. My biggest problem with testing is just the I think it comes from not knowing how to design the software in the first place, like determining where code should live in my program. So what I like about test-driven development is that if I don't know necessarily how the code should look in the end, it helps guide the design decisions for how like a certain piece of code is. I still run into problems with the overall architecture, which I've, in my research and looking up patterns and figuring out UE architecture and things like that, things are making a lot more sense for me, so I'm moving forward with that. So again, TDD, because it helps me design the code. I try to do test-driven development with every aspect of it as much as I can, and like I said, my main concern hasn't been that it's too hard to do test-driven development on certain aspects of it. I think it's just not knowing how to write software in the first place, I think. Like, I can write code, but designing a giant piece of software, that's where I run into problems. So the second part of what we're talking about is the component-based object system. And I've done a lot of research, and you're right, my blog post on that was really, really long. So I prepared and did some work on the whiteboard, and I'm going to take you over there and hope you can see it. Let me check from back here. Okay, so I don't know if you can read all that, but here's the top part here is where I talk about how normally what I think I've seen in like usually tutorial code or simple games, like let's just say you have a game with a bunch of tanks. So you have all these tanks, and you say for each tank in tanks, you move a tank, fire if it has to fire, blah, whatever it blahs, and then draw a tank. And so you go through each tank sequentially like that, and then you probably do it for whatever other entities you have in the game. And the problem with this is that what if you want to have other things that move, or maybe there's a physics interaction, and tanks have a physics model, and something else may have a physics model, but because they're not in the same, that other thing might be a human soldier or something, and it doesn't quite fit with this. There are ways, I'm sure people have done something similar, but that worked out. But I mean, this is what you see is typically is so tanks is some complex-looking object where it has a position and speed and velocity and orientation and weapon and what kind of weapon and how much ammo, and all this stuff is in this tank. But you could also have a battleship with a weapon and ammo and all these different kinds of things that could conceivably be essentially the same in terms of programming, but because they are two different entities, you can't share too much. And there's different ways people have tried to get around this with like aspects or mix-ins or whatever, but with a component-based architecture, what I found really useful was, within my research last year, and I've written about this, was the idea that if you have objects composed of just separate components, so if you have that, you can then write systems that specifically focus on that one component, or the whatever components are related. So in this example, you have a movement component, and for each movable thing, you just offset it by its speed or something like that. So you have this movable component where it has a speed, and then you have some position component probably interacting with it, and with the direction and speed, you have all you need right there to move everything that can move. So that's tanks, birds, soldiers, a rock being thrown. Anything can just have this one system, and it goes through it, all of them, and everything moves at once. And similarly with physics, if everything has a physics component, with everything that has a physics component, you can calculate physics collisions all in one batch operation, which makes it a lot easier, because if you have a tank and they're all moving, you have one move and you have another move, and let's say moving, you check to see if there's anything blocking you, and the first tank has freedom of motion, but the last tank might have to deal with all the tanks that move before it. But if you do this physics thing, they all move at once, or at least try to, and collisions are handled. It's possible to split this up into two different collision detection and response later as two separate batch processes. But and this is the hand waving. So what's really great about this is, again, it could be a tank, it could be a bird, or whatever. It could be a boulder just sitting there, But whatever it is, it's broken down by components, and the physics component itself doesn't matter what it is, like what object it is, because as far as it's concerned, it's just a physics component. Similarly with the movement component and a weapons component. So in my game right now I have a weapons component, and that weapon component basically says, what range it has, what attack strength it has, the speed it is to do the attack, and that means that I can give it to a slime creature or the hero or even a building. Like I can probably make it seem like there's archers in the building, and any of those things could have an attack component. And as far as the processing for my combat system, it's just looking at attack components as opposed to trying to figure out whether this hero is attacking this slime. It doesn't care what's attacking what, it's just processing it. So hopefully with the hand waving and this, that clears things up.